First You Think is a not-for-profit ministry of the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. Support us at ucdsm.org today.
This Tuesday, March 31st, we honor Trans Day of Visibility. Now, if you're not sure what that is, that's okay. It only started 16 years ago. Rachel Crandon, there we go, is a trans activist in Michigan who started this holiday, quote, in response to the overwhelming majority of media stories about transgender people being focused on violence. She hoped to create a day where people could celebrate the lives of transgender people, while simultaneously acknowledging that due to discrimination, not every trans person can or wants to be visible, unquote. Now, there's a cognitive dissonance here today because I'm the one preaching about how important it is to see and hear and celebrate and affirm our trans beloveds, and I'm not trans, and I get that. I want to let you know that we live in a state that has been legally hostile to trans people and a federal climate that has been supporting that hostility. So while invitations were made, it's me today because I'm safe talking about it. And let's continue to fight for the rights of our trans beloveds to feel as safe up here as I do. In the meantime, let's take a few minutes to make sure we're all caught up. Because if we're going to be honest, the conversation around gender identity in the public sphere has changed a lot in the last 15 or 20 years. One of the mistakes we can make in a space like this is to assume that if the Unitarian Universalist Association is radically trans-affirming, and if the congregation is radically trans-affirming, and indeed hosts a one-of-a-kind celebratory trans festival, well, then surely we're all caught up. But I know that we're not. And since the conversation has changed so much in the last 20 years, I understand why some folks are bewildered. Why do we have to use our pronouns? What does non-binary mean? So let's take some time today to catch up together. Because if we're going to live into our mission, loving radically, growing ethically and spiritually, and serving justly, it's not enough to hang a banner that says how affirming we are or to take group credit for our festival. If we're not all basically caught up, then we can be a place that looks really welcoming and affirming on the outside and doesn't feel quite as affirming on the inside. I want you to imagine it this way. Think of a church that's 98% men, that hosts a banner outside that says, "We welcome women," right? Now, if a woman walks into that church and like most of the guys there are nice and they're, "Oh, let's tell me about what you do at work," and all that, but a couple of them are misogynist, sexually objectifier, or just otherwise creepy. It is not a welcoming space for that woman in that church. So, as an act of radical affirmation and harm reduction, let me back up, let's catch up. Now, here's what I learned in 8th grade. There are two sexes, male and female, determined on your 23rd chromosome pair, XX and XY. Does that sound right to you as well? Okay. I also grew up with remnants of an older paradigm that said that not only were there two sexes, but each had their own attributes. Men were strong leaders that were emotionally distant, and when women were caregivers that were compassionate. That remnant for me looked like the best-selling book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, and we can't even understand one another. So I grew up assuming that biological sex, male, was the same as gender, man. Now, there is a lot to unpack from what I learned in 8th grade. It is true that your 23rd chromosome pair does determine your biological sex, but it's also true there are way more than two options. I know you can't read that. That's actually the point. There are so many other genotypes that are what we would call intersex. Your genitalia or hormones or other factors are both male and female or ambiguous or something else. And it's not always two chromosomes. Klinefelter's, for example, is XXY. Turner syndrome is just X. The main point is this. You're born and the body is right here and the doctor looks at it and assigns a sex to you at birth. They say, "Congrats, you have a fill in the blank," right? Now, in most cases, they go, "Well, that looks like a female or that looks like a male." But in the case of intersex babies, often the doctor and the parents just pick one and have a surgeon mutilate that infant, which is now illegal, as it should be in many countries. I find that once people get their head around the idea that people are not always born strictly male or female, it opens up a little space to understand how actually diverse nature is. That there are women who produce male levels of testosterone and men who produce female levels of estrogen and so forth. And the whole paradigm, the whole binary of male and female, he created them in Genesis 1:27. Suddenly it feels incredibly reductive. So you take your baby home, and if it's a girl, the clothes tend to be pink and the toys are dolls and the after-school sport is dance, and people comment on your daughter's smile and her pretty dress and how sweet she is. And if it's a boy, the clothes tend to be blues and the toys are guns and the after-school sport is football, and people comment on how quickly and strong they're growing and how responsible a leader they are. And this, in a nutshell, is the difference between sex and gender. Sex is biologically determined by the chromosome pair. Gender is socially constructed. We learn gender. It is a web of behaviors and attitudes and perspectives that we call manhood or womanhood, and we attach them to biological sex. We learn them so well that we need a book to explain to us how this other planet of gender works. But gender is never a binary. Nothing in nature is a binary. And most of us know this in our own lived experience. There comes a point in most people's lives when they have to affirm something true about themselves that doesn't fit in the box they were put in. Can I offer a harmless example from my life? As a middle school and high school student, I loved dance. I loved studying dance. I loved being in dance troupes. I was also a cisgender, heterosexual man, right? And nobody knew what to do with that, because if you liked dance, then you were gay, but I liked dance and I liked women, and I really liked dancing with women. Now, most of you probably have a much harder example. Women who had to step away from a relationship with a partner who assumed because you were female that you should be docile, when you were, in fact, 100% certified grade A butt-kicking leader. Or coming out of a closet and declaring that you are gay or lesbian or bisexual or asexual. Or learning to stop apologizing for and masking your different way of thinking and seeing the world. Or to get to the point today saying, I know that you think I'm a woman because that is the body I was born with, but I'm a man. Trans Day of Visibility is simply and exactly this: the radical and powerful act of trans people saying, hi, we exist. We have always existed. We will continue to exist. You cannot make us go away with legislation or gaslighting. And we do not want to only be discussed as victims, though we too often are. We want you to know that we can flourish. As a family member of mine who is trans once said to me, people get so stuck on the idea of gender dysphoria. Why do you hate the body you were born with? They never talk about the gender euphoria, the love of your body after you transition. If there's anything I hope all you youths can agree on, and I know that that is a tough ask, it's just this. I think that everyone wants people to flourish, to be free of oppression, to be free of the barriers that keep people from knowing their worth and dignity. So I understand what does non-binary mean? What is a they pronoun? I understand those questions. I know it has changed. Here is a quick primer. I want you to imagine a pond of gender, and there's a beach on either side. Some people like being the gender that corresponds with the biological sex they were assigned with at birth. So I was born male, I was placed on the guy beach. Those folks like me are called cisgender, because cis is a Latin prefix meaning on the same side of. I like the beach I was assigned at. Some, that beach never feels right. They want to be on the other side, which is trans is the Latin prefix for on the other side of, meaning you like the other beach. So I use he, him pronouns because those are the pronouns that go with being a man. Some folks don't like either beach in particular, and that's non-binary. That's they, them, or ze, zer, or other forms of pronouns. They are not attached to either side. There's lots of ways that we could talk about that. We could say that you're two gender, meaning you like this beach some days and this beach some days. You could say that you're agender and you're not particularly interested in either beach. You could imagine this pond for sexual attraction too, right? I like to spend all of my time on one beach, or I like both beaches, or I just like being in the water, right? This brings us to pronouns. Why do I introduce myself with pronouns every Sunday. When we make an assumption about someone's gender based on what they look like, well, then we're assuming everyone's cisgender, right? So if I'm chatting with someone I've never met and I assume that they use she or her pronouns, that this is a woman because I'm clocking a female body in some part of my brain, it puts this incredibly intense pressure on this person who may be trans to say, I think you've misgendered me. Let's start again. My name is Dave. I use he or they pronouns. Not that that person has to disclose their pronouns. It's very often not safe to out yourself as trans in Iowa with a group of people you don't know. But as a gesture of radical affirmation, I lead with, hey, I'm Reverend Steve. I use he, him pronouns. Now, someone asked me recently, okay, we get why you did that in August, and maybe even since September, but why do you keep saying it? Why do you already say that? We know by now. And I say two things. First, congrats on coming to church every week. And second, you know that, but there's a new visitor, or two, or five, every Sunday. And they don't. So when I introduce myself with pronouns, it tells this new person two pieces of information. One, hi, I'm Steve. I use he, him pronouns. I identify as a man. And two, I understand gender is a socially constructed spectrum, not a binary, and it's distinct from biological sex. In my case, they're aligned, right? Catching up is hard. 40 years ago, Unitarian ministers were preaching about gay rights, and it was hard, right? Congregations had a lot of work to do, a lot of work to make sure that every gay and lesbian or bisexual person was seen and heard with radical affirmation and welcome. And this congregation did it on the early side. 1992, it became a welcoming and affirming congregation. What happens is there comes a tipping point when a critical mass of people are caught up and they get it. And then the interesting thing stops being this person's sexuality, but in fact, their personality, what they contribute, how their gifts and ideas change the community. And so we arrive at a point where we no longer think about whether our congregational leaders are male or female or gay or straight, for example. We're just interested in their contributions, in their leadership. And now we are, as a Unitarian Universalist Association, catching up as congregations, as people, to what we had been slow to understand about the construction of gender. And so we commit ourselves to work for a day when trans and non-binary identities are so fully seen and heard as a part of the ecosystem that we think about leadership and gifts and ideas that they will share and change this community for the better, to be seen and heard. Let us co-create that world. Amen.